Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. I hope you're all doing well as we move into fall. In my podcast, I usually cover movies that are full stories. They might be fictional, they might be based on truth, but I've tended to shy away from covering documentaries. I haven't always found them to be my favorite. I haven't found them necessarily to be entertaining. And I thought, well, why don't I give it a shot this time? And I'm so glad that I did. Although there are a lot of documentaries that cover heavy topics, these include politics, conspiracy theories, murder cases, our financial system, and things that may have been done on the wrong side of history. I decided to look for topics that might be more universal and that may be a little bit more uplifting or offbeat. I don't know about you, but in these trying times that we're in right now, avoiding anything that adds major stress to my nervous system is a good thing. And I am thrilled that I have found some documentaries that I would call gems. In the first segment of the show, I'll be talking about the documentary My Octopus Teacher. This documentary is brand new and came out just on September 7th. In the second segment, I'll be giving you my thoughts on The Social Dilemma. This is also a brand new documentary which came out on September 9th. And in the third segment of the show, I'll be sharing my thoughts on the documentary Heal. As we're in a global pandemic and health is on top of many people's minds, I thought this one looked particularly interesting. Then stick around for the end of the show when I'll be sharing my reflections on the documentary Betty White, First Lady of Television. Because who doesn't love Betty White? And we can all use a few laughs. Now let's dive on in. As I mentioned in the first segment, I'll be covering the documentary My Octopus Teacher, which just came out on the 7th of September. It's rated TV G, and I can't tell you the last time I actually saw a G-rated movie, so I was actually kind of excited about this. I was thinking I'd be able to just let the story sweep over me and I wouldn't have to worry about anything too harsh or unexpected. It's an hour and 25 minutes long. It is a Netflix original documentary, and the description on Netflix of the movie is: a filmmaker forges an unusual friendship with an octopus living in a South African kelp forest, learning as the animal shares the mysteries of her world. I think that paints a good picture. There's actually a lot that happens in this movie, and it's pretty emotional as well. So I think that piece is missing in that description. I do want to mention that this movie did win an award. It won the Green Warsaw Award at the Millennium Docs Against Gravity Festival for 2020. The movie was written and directed by Pippa Ehrlich and James Reed. This is the first film that Pippa Ehrlich has worked on. And James Reed has directed a number of movies, and he's also an award-winning director. The documentary he directed, called Jago, A Life Underwater, won the Royal Television Society UK Award. He won the Best of Festival for both the Jackson Wild Media Awards and Jackson Hole Film Festival. Other documentaries he's directed are We'll Work with Nuts, Rise of the Warrior Apes, and South Korea, Earth's Hidden Wilderness. And Craig Foster is in this movie. He himself is a director and cinematographer, but in this case he's one of the subjects of the movie. He is our explorer who befriends this octopus. And Craig Foster himself is an award winner. He won Best Film and Best South African Film for The Great Dance, A Hunter's Story at the Encounters South Africa International Documentary Festival. He also won Best Achievement in Directing Wildlife Program and Best Achievement in Cinematography Wildlife Program for the movie Into the Dragon's Lair for the South African Film and Television Awards. And for the same movie, he was nominated for a News and Documentary Emmy Award. Just to start, I'll say that this is a fascinating documentary. There are a number of things that I like about it, and that make it surprising. One is, when it starts out, it is not clear that it is going to actually be a documentary. It's just an exploration. Craig Foster has finished 2 years of intensive work. He's burnt out and he needs a break. And he decides to go to the place where he spent the majority of his childhood. It's a place called the Cape of Storms, and it's on the western Cape of South Africa. It's a place where he has lots of memories from when he was a child. He used to play in rock pools and dive in the shallow kelp forests. He used to enjoy the rocky coast, and it just felt like a place where he could unwind and heal. Yet in this place, getting in the water is not the easiest thing. He describes it as one of the wildest, most scary places to swim on the planet. And if you can get used to the cold temperatures of the water, it can be very invigorating, and you can feel your body come alive. He also talks about the fact that when you go underwater and you swim among the kelp forests, you can actually see this forest in 3 dimensions, which is not something you can normally do with a forest on land. As he goes out in the water pretty much every day, he starts finding that he has more and more energy, and he's starting to find some motivation to get back to doing what he loves, which is taking photos. So he starts diving in and taking photos underwater of the environment below, of the sea creatures and the kelp forests. He also talks about the fact that he doesn't like to wear scuba gear. He feels it weighs him down, and so he has to build up a stamina in terms of holding his breath underwater. Eventually, in doing all this, he finds a very special place. It's protected by a kelp forest because the forest is keeping the swells of the water at bay. And this allowed him to have a relatively protected place where he could do a lot of observation. And this one day he goes in and he sees something that really caught his eye. It was a strange shape. It was covered with all kinds of shells and rocks, and it was sort of in a ball. And it looked really quite beautiful and yet strange at the same time. And there were fish swimming around it, and they seemed kind of confused too. And then suddenly, an octopus flies out from under these rocks and shells. And being very curious about what is going on, he follows this octopus. And he finds that it buries itself in some kelp. It's very slippery kelp, but she manages to hold on with her suction cups on her arms and stays very hidden. He was very taken by this octopus, and he starts to think, what if he visited this octopus every day? What would happen? What would he learn? And this really starts the premise of this whole movie. He does indeed go and visit every day, or every day that he can. And he does this for a little bit shy of a year. And by doing this, he invites us, the audience, into something that we probably would never experience on our own. It did get me thinking, how often do I even think about an octopus on a daily basis? I have to admit, it's very rarely. And in this instance, well, I have to admit that Craig Foster gets a little obsessed. He goes in every day, and the more he learns about this octopus, the more he wants to find out about octopuses, and he thinks about this octopus all the time. He's highly motivated to make discoveries. And I have to say, this movie does an amazing job of capturing footage of this octopus. I don't exactly know how they did it. There are 2 directors, and I'm under the impression that maybe both of them were underwater, capturing footage from different angles in order to capture this octopus. But there are times they're seeing the octopus in these little crevices, and also sometimes the octopus will just dart out and swim very quickly a great distance away, and often not in a straight path, and also often shooting out some ink. I just can't imagine this could have been an easy film to shoot. And while Craig Foster opted not to wear a tank with oxygen, I can't help but wonder if the cinematographers made a different choice. So we get to experience close-up what an octopus's life is like. But also, not just a regular life. We'll also get to see how an octopus reacts when there's a human in its territory. As Craig Foster visits the octopus more and more, she starts getting less afraid of him, and she starts to recognize that he's not going to hurt her, that she can trust him. And eventually we see that the octopus chooses to make contact with Craig. And then Craig starts looking at her patterns. How does she move around? And it's not in just one fashion. She has a bunch of different ways that she gets around and it turns out she can leave different kinds of tracks in the bottom of the ocean. He learns about how intelligent she is, and he also talks about how they forge some level of trust, and when that trust is broken, how do they mend it? And we get to see this in action. He talks about how amazing it is to start having a relationship with this animal who has such a different way of seeing the world and communicating. He talks about this experience as just being mind-blowing for him. There's also a point where Craig starts getting more and more interested in what an octopus is all about, and he starts doing research, reading papers by marine biologists and scientists. And one thing that he learns is that octopuses are supposed to be nocturnal animals. And so one thing we get to see is Craig going out in the middle of the night when it's still dark and looking for the octopus to see what she is up to. It's funny, even though this is a rated G movie and I was looking forward to not having to worry a whole lot about anything, going under the ocean when it's completely dark, I found myself feeling a little bit nervous. And it wasn't just at that time. We also get to recognize that an octopus can be prey. Not only will an octopus prey on other animals to feed itself, but it is prey for sharks. And there are a lot of small sharks that are around the bottom of this ocean. And frankly, this itself kind of scared me. Here is Craig diving without a tank, and he is in this kelp forest, which has its own ecosystem full of different kinds of animals, all trying to survive. And granted, he's very different from them, and maybe they don't know exactly what to make of him. But I think he was very brave to be around these animals, possibly getting in the middle of some kind of tussle. I think he could have been easily injured, and yet at the same time he doesn't really talk about his fear around the animals. And I found that in itself fascinating. There's a certain level at which he is trusting the ecosystem and nature to protect him. But meanwhile, we get to see how vulnerable the octopus is in its own home. It needs to outthink the sharks and any other animal that would want to end its life. In this movie, we get to see a very close encounter, and we also, at one point, get to see how the octopus protects itself when there is a shark heavily in pursuit of it. And as Craig remarks, it is fascinating to see how this octopus is so smart. Generally, octopuses live about a year or a little bit less, and so they don't necessarily have a long time in order to figure out how to survive in the world. And yet this octopus really seemed to know the lay of the land and know exactly what to do and be one step ahead of its enemy. There's a point where we also see that the octopus is not doing so well. I won't give away what happened, but it does get an injury. And Craig is torn up about this. And yet he goes every day and provides some level of emotional and moral support to the octopus as it heals. It's hard to really know if his presence makes any difference for the octopus or not, but clearly it makes a difference for Craig. There's a point where in building this relationship with this octopus, he gets very entangled as well as attached. He is grateful for all that he is learning from this octopus, hence the title, My Octopus Teacher. He expresses over time how what he's learning from the octopus and his experience of seeing it every day is affecting him personally. He feels like he's melting, he's more accessible and approachable to people, and never in his wildest dreams did he ever imagine something like this happening for him. Now, even though Craig was letting us into this very intimate relationship he was having with his octopus, there were moments where I felt it was a little over the top. Granted, he didn't have a lot going on in his regular world. This seemed to be the absolute focus of just about everything he was doing, other than his son would be with him at times and explore the sea kelp world with him and also get to meet the octopus. But this really did dominate his life, so in that regard I could see how he's going to care a lot about the thing he's putting most of his time and energy into. And yet I wondered if he was getting a little bit too obsessed, if he was using this to actually make a documentary so that he might have some income to bring in, if this was more of a gimmick, because there were just moments that I couldn't quite relate to how attached he was actually becoming to this octopus. And I appreciated the emotional ups and downs, and at the same time I felt that for him they were possibly a little exaggerated. The one thing I'll say about this movie is the imagery is gorgeous. This is a beautiful movie to watch. It's done really well. They definitely used drones at times, so you could see how small Craig looked in the water compared to the whole world around him. And you could also get a real sense of what this underwater world was all about, how it looked, what it must have been like to live in this place. There are often times where I've known people who have had big aquariums in their homes with fish around, and I didn't know if I should feel sorry for the fish or not. But after seeing this underworld place where the real wildlife lived, I actually felt the aquariums didn't look that much different. So that gave me a little bit of peace of mind. I don't want to give away what happens in the movie. There's a lot of day in, day out, what's life like with the octopus. But I will say overall, you get to see the arc of nature. And you get to see nature take its course the way that it's meant to be. And also Craig talks about his own inner conflicts about this. He gets wrapped up and has a lot of emotional feelings about the octopus. And there are times that he wants to interfere. He wants to help the octopus live perhaps an easier life or a more protected life, and yet he knows that he really shouldn't interfere. Something else that I found fascinating about this movie is that as Craig did more and more research about octopuses, he started making discoveries that were beyond what had already been written up. Because he was so focused on this octopus's life, he got to know all about its life in great detail and with great intimacy. And the documentary didn't say, but I really hope that he was able to write a paper or provide information that would be helpful to the scientific world. Granted, he definitely has this documentary to show for it, but I think in the scientific world, having something written would make a difference. So yes, I recommend this movie. And while it is rated G, there are some difficult struggles, so I wouldn't necessarily encourage young children to watch it at least all the way through. There are definitely sections that would be great for a young child, but I would think this would be more appropriate and more interesting too, probably to a young teen. I will say that I was never tired or bored throughout watching this movie, and so something as simple as the life of an octopus definitely enthralled me. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent movie, I would give this movie an 8. And I come up with that number because, as I mentioned, there were times where I felt this was possibly a little hooky, or that Craig was taking the relationship a little bit too far. I wasn't always clear on his intentions around the documentary, but it was a beautiful movie to watch. It was thoroughly entertaining, and I think that you could learn some really interesting information that you may not have in your everyday life. So now stay tuned for the next segment of the show, when I'll be looking at the movie The Social Dilemma after the break.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Thank you for joining in for the second segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. In the last segment, I talked about the documentary My Octopus Teacher. I'm now going to discuss the documentary The Social Dilemma. This movie is considered a science and nature documentary, which I would think would be a little bit unusual, considering this is mostly about social media. But I could see how it would apply if you're looking at it from more of a sociological viewpoint. This movie is rated PG-13. There are some thematic elements, disturbing and violent images, and suggestive material. As I mentioned, this was just released on September 9th this year. It's an hour and 34 minutes long. As of Thursday, it was the 4th most watched movie streamed on Netflix in the United States. And the description on Netflix of this documentary is, it explores the dangerous human impact of social networking, with tech experts sounding the alarm on their own creations. and I think that is a very astute description. This movie has won a couple of awards. It won the Impact Film Award at the Boulder International Film Festival, and it won a FACT Award honorable mention at the CPH DOX Awards. The director of this documentary is Jeff Orlowski. He has won a number of awards, including Best Feature Documentary for the movie Chasing Ice at the Big Sky Documentary Film Festival. He won the Call to Action Award, as well as the People's Choice Award, and the General Film Festival Award at the Boulder International Film Festival. And the movies Chasing Coral and Chasing Ice have both won other awards at other festivals. And the only other movies that Jeff Orlowski has directed have been short documentaries. Now, this documentary includes many Silicon Valley and social media executives and former executives. These include Tristan Harris, who is, for the most part, the lead speaker of this documentary. He is co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology. The other co-founder is Asa Raskin, who used to work for Firefox and Mozilla Labs, and he is also prominently featured in this movie. Others in this movie include former executives and employees at Twitter, Instagram, Uber, Facebook, YouTube, Apple, Google, Pinterest, and then there are also some experts from universities. This includes Harvard Business School, Stanford University, and New York University. All of these people provide perspective and factual information, and yet there's also a dramatized part to this movie. We get to see a family in action around social media and how it's impacting their lives. The actors included in this family dramatization are Barbara Gehring. She plays the mom, and she actually has only one credit listed on the Internet Movie Database besides The Social Dilemma, and that is for Dragon and the Hawk. Skylar Casando plays the son. He won Outstanding Young Performers in a TV series for the Bill Engvall Show, and that's through the Young Artist Awards. Also through the same awards, he won Best Performance in a DVD film, Young Ensemble Cast for Spooky Buddies, which he shared with several others of the cast. While he's been in a lot of television, his movies include The Amazing Spider-Man, Vacation, Booksmart, and The Cat in the Moon. Also in this movie is the actor Vincent Kartheiser. He is an award winner. He was part of the award for Outstanding Performance by an Ensemble in a Drama Series for Mad Men, as part of the Screen Actor Guild Awards. And he won the Young Hollywood Award for Breakout Performance of the Year on Screen through the Young Hollywood Awards. He's been in such movies as Masterminds, Days Out of Days, A Kind of Murder, My Friend Dahmer, and Crypto. Kara Hayward plays the daughter in this movie, and she has won awards through the Central Ohio Film Critics Association, as well as the Phoenix Film Critics Society Awards, having won with the cast Best Ensemble Acting for Moonrise Kingdom. She's also been in the movies Quitters, Manchester by the Sea, To the Stars, and Us. So I will say that this movie surprised me. I thought, okay, it's about social media. I don't know how interesting this will be. I don't know if there's a big fuss that should be made about it. By the end of the movie, I felt pretty much blown away. Not only that, I felt awakened and like I wanted to take some action. And this is definitely a call to action movie. The movie starts out talking about how social media at the beginning was fundamentally good. The intention behind it was to connect people and to make things happen. It was there to create some wonderful things in the world. But as former executives are asked about how social media is impacting the world now, they're saying that at the time social media was developed, they were pretty much naive. The flip side of the coin of everything positive that was expecting is that there was the unexpected, and it is not that positive. In fact, it seems to be downright dangerous. Social media seems to be causing mental health issues in social media users. Millions of Americans are addicted to their phones. There's a lot of fake news, so people are having trouble discerning what is the truth. And there are groups like white supremacists and lynch mobs who are now present online. While there was this intention that social media would really help the information age, it seems like we have actually gone more into a disinformation age. What this documentary talks about is what is behind the problem and what needs to be done to possibly fix it. There is this phenomenon around addiction. People get addicted to email, checking Facebook and checking the feeds, and checking other social media platforms on a regular basis. And this is because just like when taking drugs, we get a hit of good feelings as a result of taking a look at these things. Every time something new comes in, it's like, oh yay, something to kind of feel happy about. This has created a level of addiction which keeps us glued to our phones instead of interacting with people real time around us. So when social media began, they needed to find a way to monetize it. And it seemed like the best model for doing that was advertising. Well, in order for advertising to bring in the most amount of money, their advertisements need to bring in the most amount of views possible. So social media is designed to make people look at their phones, at social media platforms as much as possible. The more views, the more money comes in from advertisers. So in a way, capitalism is behind this, and it is hurting us. Now that's a pretty simplistic way of looking at it. The movie definitely goes more in depth and gives perspectives of different experts. But the movie also dives into the fact that these social media companies are doing research into how humans work. How does their brain function, and how can they essentially kind of put people under a spell so that they kind of can't break away from their phones. And social media is going to outsmart them every turn. There's knowledge about what this is doing to people in general, but also there's a generation now of kids. These are kids who were born 1996 or later, who this is the world that they know. And we don't yet know what kind of impact social media is going to have on this generation. One thing that is known, however, is that the information that each person gets through their social media channels is customized to what that person likes and dislikes. As a result, there's not one equal truth that's spread among everyone. Each person gets the information that's catered specifically to them, and that's what they see as their truth based on what is reflected in their wants and needs. So this can create a lot of confusion. Something that I thought was particularly effective in this movie was the fact that they dramatized what was going on in a particular family. This really gave a visual and drove home a point. One in particular is how addicted we are to our phones. It showed a family sitting down to dinner and everyone had their phone. And the mom finally put her foot down. And she had this contraption. It was actually supposed to be kind of a cookie jar that had a timer on it and a lock so that nobody could get into the cookie jar until the timer or a certain period of time had gone by. She opted to have everybody put their phones in this cookie jar, and it was just supposed to be for the amount of time that they were going to have dinner together. But what they discovered was that they're already kind of desocialized. Once the phones are put away, they didn't really know how to have a conversation again. They didn't know how to interact or what would be interesting to each other. And then there was an overall challenge as to whether or not somebody in the family could actually go for a certain period of time without having access to their phone. And it is very challenging when the whole world is wired, and that is the place for communication. And we're getting these hits of internal hormones that feel good as a result of looking at our phones and social media. Another effective dramatic illustration had to do with Vincent Kartheiser's character. Or maybe I should say characters. He looks like three different people. They're all in the same room. One represents advertising artificial intelligence, one represents engagement artificial intelligence, and the third character he plays represents growth artificial intelligence. He does a great job of acting really like three different characters, each with a different motivation. And while they do have different motivations, they all pretty much seem to be on the same team, which is for social media to win. There's one point they're faced with a challenge. The member of the family who is within the family being challenged to not look at their phone for a certain amount of time. Well, let's put it that is not in service of social media companies. They want that person's attention. And so there are things that they will do to manipulate that person's social media feed so that they must look at their phone and not succeed at taking a break from the phone and social media. It was pretty scary to see how much power there is over individuals and their own willpower. And something that's scarier is that for different reasons, but all because of phones and the different social media platforms, people's lives have been shortened. And to protect people, it seems that there does indeed need to be some kind of regulation. There's regulations for lots of things, and that is to protect people from being harmed. But the social media industry at this point pretty much seems to be regulating itself. So after watching this, it was pretty scary. You can see how social media can truly impact the outcome of elections, the quality of people's lives, what people's belief systems are, and how they are influenced. But because of the way that social media companies are running, their goal is just to make more and more money. They don't have any incentive to necessarily do the right thing. And their models at this point for how they are a business, they're not set up to do it differently. It would require a huge overhaul, so that's a big problem in itself. I was struck by how many former social media executives were speaking up. I was also struck by the fact that pretty much all of them were former executives, that they felt they could no longer support a system that was going down this path. And I myself couldn't help but think this seems to be as big a crisis as climate change, at least in terms of how it's going to affect people and the quality of our lives and the length of our lives. And I was just fascinated by the fact that who would have thought that when social media started, this is the path it could have headed down. But I think like with any business people, you start out by trying something, you see how it works, and if it's not working correctly, then you have to make a change. The question here is whether or not the social media companies are going to make a change because they're making such great profits right now, even though it's at the expense of the quality of life of many people, and if they're able to find a way to make the change so that it's a change for good. So this was a good movie. It's a really important movie. Really important. It's the kind of movie that I think pretty much everyone who at least has a phone and is connected to social media in some way needs to see. So we're talking millions of people should see this movie. One thing I was heartened by is at the end, they talk a little bit about how individuals can help take some action. And in the credits, you could already see who was involved with or taking action with the Center for Humane Technology. It's interesting. In some ways, this movie reminded me a bit of the documentary An Inconvenient Truth. It is set up to be a big wake-up call for a lot of people. And now that we are experiencing more and more of the impact of global warming, as well as climate change, and An Inconvenient Truth came out in 2006, so we're talking more than 10 years. What this says is it takes a long time for people to get on board and to make change happen. Now, it's hard to know if something that is man-made will be a little bit more easily changed by man. I think we probably have a bit more control over this, but there's definitely conflict between the people and the companies. With global warming, we're dealing with nature, and it is a little bit different, and there's only so much that we know about nature. Even so, no matter what, it's time that all of these crucial things be addressed. For life as we know it will be in even more grave danger. At the top of the show, I talked about how I wanted to find documentaries that were more positive and uplifting and not so hard to take. This is a hard movie. At the same time, it's done in a way that feels a little bit more lighthearted. It drives home the point without hitting it over your head. And by the end of the movie, I felt motivated to help. And that is an empowering place to be in, versus a place where you feel knocked down somehow. So yes, I would recommend this movie. Like I said, I think everyone who is connected to a phone or social media should see it. I think the movie is well done. If there are any gaps in it, I would say that this documentary doesn't address privacy issues. And that may be a different topic, but I suspect that that is one of the factors that can also whittle away at someone's quality of life. And based on that, I'm going to rate this movie a 9. Now stay tuned for the next segment of the show when I'll be looking at the movie Heal after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome to the third segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. In the last segment, I talked about the movie The Social Dilemma. I'm now going to discuss the movie Heal. Heal is a documentary that is focused on health and well-being and lifestyle. It's rated TV-14 because of some language. It came out in 2017, and it's an hour and 46 minutes long. And this movie won the Maui Film Festival's Soul in Cinema Award for Best Film. The movie was written and directed by Kelly Noonan, and this is actually the first film that she has directed. She has in the past been known more as a producer and an actor. This documentary features interviews with many of the experts and specialists in health in the United States and beyond. The list of names of experts is long. It includes Deepak Chopra, Joseph Dispenza, Peter Crone, Kelly Turner, Marianne Williamson, Michael Beckwith, Greg Braden, Patty Penn, Robin Wergen, Kelly Brogan, Anita Morjani, Bruce Lipton, Diane Portia, Anthony William, David Hamilton, Mark Emerson, Joan Borisenko, and Bernie Siegel. All these people have worked with many people who had health issues from all over the world, from all walks of life, and they bring a lot of wisdom and scientific knowledge to the forefront in this movie. My feeling is if you're a human being and have a body, you need to see this movie. Wouldn't it have been nice when we all were born? We came with an instruction manual, so we knew how to take care of ourselves and others. Health has been a personal interest of mine, and I've seen some of these people speak or read their books, but they've all been separate, kind of in a vacuum. What this movie does is it brings all these specialists together in one movie, so you get a big picture, and it was amazing. And it was pretty amazing. The description of this documentary on Netflix is stories from spiritual leaders, physicians, and those with chronic illnesses reveal the powerful connection between the human psyche and physical health. But I would say that doesn't go deep enough. It really talks about keeping up our health is more than just exercise and eating right, although those are important too. It's about how the physical, spiritual, and mental all impact our overall health. And we have a lot more power over our health than we've been led to believe, that our bodies are highly intelligent and they're designed to heal. And while doctors know an awful lot, often their approach to helping somebody heal is to prescribe something. And often the prescription will have some side effects, which means something else needs to be prescribed. And there's this snowball effect that ultimately is in disservice to the body. The movie starts out with a number of individuals talking about the health issues that they have dealt with, whether for a long time or a short time, but that have greatly impacted the quality of their life. And then the director, Kelly Noonan, talks about how she's fascinated with healers and how our thoughts and emotions affect our health. And she also is interested in looking at what energy healers and mind-body medicine can do. And what if that was considered normal? And while there's a question as to what normal is, what she's aware of is she has so many friends and family members who are sick these days. It just seems like the number of people who have some kind of illness or autoimmune issue, it's just skyrocketing. And at the start of the movie, she decided to bring a group of close family friends together to have what she hopes will be a healing with somebody who works with energy healing. And then we start hearing from the experts. They talk about what disease or dis-ease is really about, that it actually probably starts in the mind, and that what you think and believe can actually impact how your body behaves. That there's an integral connection between what we believe is what our body hears and how our body behaves. So if we deeply believe good things about our body and our life, then chances are that is going to help our body respond in kind. If we believe that we may have an illness or we have some kind of unresolved negative energy that has dwelled within our psyche, then that can also affect our health. Bruce Lipton, who's a stem cell biologist, talks about how the perception and belief about life are the signals that adjust how cells respond and function. And some of these experts have had their own health issues or have had an accident that required them to heal. And being scientists, they watch their own process and they're able to bring firsthand experience besides their knowledge of the work to the table. Now, some of the alternatives that are talked about here would probably be considered pretty woo-woo. The fact is, no matter how you judge it, these experts have been able to help people heal. Something that I found most compelling in this movie are the personal stories of people who've been struggling with health issues. We get to see a woman who is diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, another woman who has ulcers that appear all over her skin, and there's yet another woman who had had advanced lymphoma. In the movie, we get to hear their stories and what happened to them. I'm not going to share what happened to each of them because I think it's one of the more poignant parts of the movie, but I will share that I think it was very smart of Kelly Noonan to choose these particular people to tell their stories. And I think it's because their stories are the ones that we probably fear the most. I think so many people feel like there may be some kind of ticking time bomb in their body. They don't want to take their health for granted, and on the other hand, they just never know when or if a health issue is going to crop up for them. And what if it's the worst thing that they could imagine, which might be stage 4 cancer? What does that mean for them? And this movie really helps to try to answer those kinds of questions. There's another expert. Her name is Kelly Turner. She's a PhD and she's a researcher. She's been studying radical remissions for more than 10 years. She's traveled the world looking for remission survivors from all different countries and all walks of life. She's analyzed more than 1,500 cases and conducted more than 250 in-depth interviews. And she's talked to people who have had all different kinds of cancer, and that includes cancer that's considered inoperable. She asked them what they did that may have resulted in their radical remission. So while there was a long list of things in general, what she was able to do with all the cases that she looked at was boil down the things that they all had in common in terms of actions. And she found there were 9 basic things that everyone who had had a radical remission had done. And interestingly, only 2 of them had something specifically to do with the body. The others had to do with emotion, taking control of health, following intuition, having a spiritual connection, things like that. She also talks to people who seem to just have some kind of spiritual connection that has made them innate healers. They seem to have some way of seeing disease, seeing what's wrong, and then helping the people with those issues heal. And while this could seem a bit far-fetched, the fact is these healers were able to help the people who were sick. And I think Kelly Noonan included these healers in the documentary to help demonstrate that there's so much that we really don't know yet, and that ultimately it may not matter how we get healed as long as we get healed. I think it's also interesting that there was a doctor, her name is Dr. Kelly Brogan, who was interviewed, and she herself was a physician, and after she was pregnant, she had a thyroid issue. And she knew that if she went the Western medicine route, she would be given pills, and she would probably be taking those pills for the rest of her life. And that's not something that she wanted to do, so she actually went to a naturopath, and her issue resolved within 6 months. Dr. Lipton talks about how conventional Western medicine is great for some things, especially trauma. But for diseases, that may not be the first route that you want to check out. And depending on your belief system and what you grew up with, this may be really hard to hear. And so I think it's very useful that in this movie, we get to see the experts speak to talk about their work and their specialty, all in the name of, I think, opening up people's minds to alternative ways of dealing with their health. And I think the timing of this movie is important because as we see more disease becoming prevalent, it's important to know as much as possible to help people to heal. And this movie really talks about how there is true scientific evidence that there is indeed a mind-body connection. And one way, so that you're not just taking these experts' word for it, that this movie tries to help demonstrate that this is true, has to do with discussion about the placebo effect. How when people are given a fake sugar pill, when they think they may be getting true medicine, they can heal as well as the person who's getting the true medicine. And according to Dr. Lipton, that really is about the power of positive thinking. And Dr. Beckwith raises a very important point. Many of us have been raised to believe that if there is something wrong with your body, you go to the doctor. The doctor's the expert, knows everything, is the one who's going to best be able to help you heal. As a result, individuals give up a lot of their personal power around decisions about their health to their doctor. He talks about how, while a doctor may be expert at diagnosing an issue, and that is very important, always take a prognosis with a grain of salt. Because there's so much we're learning about the power of belief in terms of our health. If we hear a prognosis and we believe it, it may be exactly what we manifest in our bodies. So if someone hears they only have a few months left to live, well, they may manifest that and it may become the reality. But if they don't believe that, and they choose to believe that they have much longer to live, well, they may have just increased their chances. At least that's what he's alluding to. Dr. Deepak Chopra talks about how getting a prognosis is kind of like being told what the temperature is now based on the average temperature of the year. But depending on the part of the country that you're from, the average may not reflect where you're from. And if you're sick, there's no reason to think that you couldn't be part of the group that is going to survive for a much longer period of time. I like that this documentary introduced some alternative healing methods, some that you may never have heard of. We get to see one woman get a treatment with sound healing. Dr. Jeffrey Thompson does a sweep of sound and tries to find the sound that will work best with this person's particular nervous system. What he finds is that her nervous system is overloaded and it has trouble staying relaxed after it's been in a relaxed state for a while. When it finds the tone that the body seems to like the best, the woman is given a bath in this particular sound, and afterwards she feels very, very relaxed. And that leads to another point that was really driven home in this movie. That is that most of the time, stress is a huge culprit in causing disease. And so the more that we can relax and not tax our nervous systems, the better off we'll be health-wise. And so, not a surprise, something that also came up is meditation. I myself have had a meditation practice off and on, and mostly because I've heard over and over how good it is for you, and when I do it regularly, I have noticed a bit of a difference. But what I liked about this movie is it goes into great depth in terms of why meditation actually helps. And after hearing about it, I thought, wow, if all I did was just really pick up my meditation practice, it's the one thing I do, I will reap a lot of benefits from it, more than I knew. So the way this movie is packed with information, as I mentioned at the beginning, I felt like it was almost as if we were given almost a user manual on how to run our bodies and how to live our lives so that we are in optimum health and are able to live our best life. Something else I liked about the movie is the way that the experts were interviewed. You could tell that the interviews had been conducted at one time, and then the director or editor must have had transcripts, and they picked out the pieces that fit together. So we see the different experts over and over and over based on what they're saying, and the information is pieced together by topic. And as a result, it feels like we're actually getting a number of experts who are supporting one particular idea. And that corroboration helped me feel like I could have more confidence in what was being said. Now, in one story, there is a woman who had gotten better with some of these methods, but then her issue came back with a huge flare-up. On one hand, I appreciate how realistic this movie painted this person's issue, that it wasn't going to be resolved by a snap of the fingers, and that there must be something missing in terms of how this person is healing, because all the things that they tried while there was improvement, it didn't stick. And the documentary didn't go long enough for us to see whether or not this woman finally did resolve her issue or not. It landed in the place where we just kind of have to wait and see, and this woman is on her journey, and we wish her well. I personally wanted more of a hopeful message. I wanted to at least know that she was going to be trying something else. The woman ultimately decided that she just didn't have enough energy to continue trying alternative methods, and she was going to ultimately do the Western medicine method, which she knew in the long run wasn't going to benefit her, but for the short term at least would give her some relief. So it was helpful to know that if you have some kind of issue or autoimmune concern, it may take time before you discover what the particular combination of things is needed in order for more natural healing. Also in the movie, some of the more spiritual healers, we see them doing healing, and we see the effects in the moment of how the person they did the healing on is feeling, but we don't see over time whether it really truly made a difference. So for those who are more skeptical, it doesn't necessarily give them confidence in what indeed these healers can do. Also, the documentary looked at the issue of children who are born with disease or have disease at a very young age. And the documentary talked about how they don't really know why that is. I appreciated the truth about that, but it did make me wonder if the mind-body-spirit methods work for adults, what is behind the healing for children? And one thing that I wish that the movie had addressed was aging. There was talk about how stress and also trauma builds up in the body. Negative emotions that haven't been released, that can cause health issues. Though it did not answer the question as to if somebody is elderly and they have a lot of health issues, can those issues reverse after many years with meditation and belief systems and other alternative methods that are brought up in the movie? Despite these things, I highly recommend this movie. I believe anybody who has a body should see this movie because there's information here that may be very new to you and that could someday make a real difference in your health and well-being and your quality of life. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent movie, I would give this a 9. There were those issues that I mentioned there at the end, so the documentary isn't perfect, but it is definitely a worthwhile watch. Now stay tuned for the final segment of the show when I'll be sharing my thoughts on the movie Betty White, First Lady of Television after the break.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome to the last segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. In the prior segment, I talked about the documentary Heal. I'm now going to discuss the documentary Betty White, First Lady of Television. And as the name suggests, this is a biographical documentary. It came out in 2018, and it's just 55 minutes long, so it's a pretty quick watch. Also, it's rated TV-14. This documentary was directed by Stephen Boucher. He is a Primetime Emmy nominee. Over the years, he's been nominated for Outstanding Documentary or Nonfiction Series, Outstanding Nonfiction Series, and Outstanding Nonfiction Special for Pioneers of Television, and that is through the Primetime Emmy Awards. He's directed a number of TV documentaries. These include The Oregon Trail, The Frozen Chosen, and Mary Tyler Moore, A Celebration. And this film, of course, stars Betty White. She has been nominated for 4 Golden Globe Awards. For Best Performance by an Actress in a TV Series, Comedy or Musical for the Golden Girls, for all 4 nominations. She's also been nominated for a number of Primetime Emmy Awards, and she actually won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Guest Actress in a Comedy Series for Saturday Night Live, as well as Outstanding Guest Actress in a Comedy Series for The John Larroquette Show. Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series for The Golden Girls, and Outstanding Continuing Performance by a Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series twice for The Mary Tyler Moore Show. She also won some awards through the American Comedy Awards, including Funniest Female Guest Appearance in a TV Series for Ally McBeal, as well as Funniest Female Performer in a TV Series Leading Role for Network Cable or Syndication for The Golden Girls. And back in 1990, she won the Lifetime Achievement Award in Comedy for the American Comedy Awards, USA. And this is among many other wins and nominations. To give you some background on her filmography, according to the Internet Movie Database, she appeared in the series Life with Elizabeth from 1953 to 1955, and although she appeared in other TV series, she is more known for the following TV series: The Mary Tyler Moore Show from 1973 to 1977, The Betty White Show from 1977 to 1978, Mama's Family from 1983 to 86, The Golden Girls from 1985 to 1992, Maybe This Time from 1995 to 1996, Boston Legal from 2005 to 2008, and Hot in Cleveland from 2010 to 2015. And there are movies as well as many other television appearances. And there are many appearances by her colleagues in this documentary. Those who are called out the most include Valerie Bertinelli, Georgia Engel, Tina Fey, Valerie Harper, Jennifer Love Hewitt, Gavin MacLeod, Mary Tyler Moore, Carl Reiner, Ryan Reynolds, and Alex Trebek. The description Netflix has for this documentary is, "This documentary on actress and television producer Betty White traces her decades-long career as a woman breaking new ground in entertainment." And while that is accurate, there's also much about her personal life and what's important to her. And who doesn't love Betty White? She is amazing. Watching this documentary, though, and seeing the full breadth of her career, I learned a lot and I was really impressed. Something to note is that Betty White was born in 1922. That means she is 98 years old. And she had 3 projects that she was working on in 2019. That is pretty incredible. And Betty White talks about the fact that she knows this. It's amazing that she is still wanted and that she's still able to work. And it's interesting how her career has evolved. She talks about how her career started. She grew up in California in the Hollywood area, and there was a local TV station that had her sing a song. And a disc jockey spotted her and asked her if she'd become the lead to a show that he was starting. That show was a live show, and she worked on it 5.5 hours a day for 6 days a week. With all that experience, she got very used to being a performer and being on television. In the early days, I'd say it looks like she's a very wholesome, sweet young woman. Over the years, as she aged, it seems like directors and writers took advantage of that wholesomeness and added an edge to it. She'd play off this innocent essence that she had, and ultimately pull off putting people down and saying dirty jokes, all kinds of things that were counter to what her appearance was, which just made her very funny. She also has amazing comedic timing, which many of the comedians who were interviewed for the documentary noted. The format of this documentary has a lot of people who are close to Betty being interviewed, and then there are colleagues who are being interviewed. And interspersed with what they're being interviewed about, there are clips of what they're specifically talking about. For example, Gavin MacLeod, who was on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, talked about a particular episode where Betty's White character has made Gavin MacLeod's character wear a dress, and she is working on fixing that dress. It's actually a wedding dress. So Gavin would talk about that, and then we'd actually see the clip that he was talking about. That made their story very real, and it also gave us a moment to see Betty's skill at comedy and a chance to laugh. There were snippets from the Mary Tyler Moore Show, The Golden Girls, Hot in Cleveland, from talk shows like The Jimmy Kimmel Show, movies like The Proposal, and some of her older work, like from Life with Elizabeth, which was from back in the 1950s. So I liked having some of the background to these shows and clips. And something that was kind of fascinating is several of the people who talked about her, including Mary Tyler Moore, Valerie Harper, and Carl Reiner, they've all passed away since this documentary was made. Betty has outlived them. And I felt very lucky that they actually made this documentary and that we got clips of these great comedians talking about Betty White. Not only because of their reflections on her, but also just to see them and have a sense of why they appreciate comedy so much. And while many of the actors who were on the show being interviewed about Betty White were great, the one that really stood out to me was Valerie Bertinelli. She worked most recently with Betty on the show Hot in Cleveland. Apparently, Betty had been approached to be in this series, and she committed to being in the pilot, but she really hadn't had a lot of interest in continuing on. But once they shot the pilot, she was hooked, and she was continuing on with them. And Valerie Bertinelli stars in that series, and she felt so privileged to be able to work with a great like Betty White. But there was a particular episode of Hot in Cleveland where Betty White meets Kyle Reiner. They're out on what appears to be their first date, and here we have two absolute pros who have had decades of experience being comedians. And it was clear that they were pros. They came off absolutely natural together. And Valerie Bertinelli reflects on this and how lucky she was to have witnessed these two pros working together. There's more to it than that, but I'll leave it at that. It's definitely a highlight and something to look forward to if you watch the documentary. Now, there are also some parts that were much more personal, and I really appreciated having a glimpse into the life of this amazing woman. She used to love being on game shows, and she was really good at it. She's quite the competitor and really enjoys games in general. Well, there's one game show called Password, where Betty met her future husband, Alan Ludden. I had recalled knowing that she and Alan Ludden were married, but I really didn't know much about it or any of the background. And quite a bit is revealed from how they met, to how they saw each other when Betty's living in California and Password is taking place in New York, to how Alan courted her, and how things led to marriage. What's also precious in this movie is we see how much Betty loves Alan. He passed away a good number of years ago, and yet it's clear that the love never died. It is still very present for her. And that seems to be a clear message in this whole documentary, about how where there is love, there is always love, and that is just a fabulous message. We also get more of a glimpse into her personal life. Along the line of games, she is a big crossword puzzle lover, as well as a Scrabble lover. And we actually get a glimpse of her playing Scrabble, which apparently is a regular thing that she does with a couple of her friends. And they reveal that when they're together just as friends, they're friends, but once they do Scrabble, well, the gloves come off, and Betty is quite the competitor. We also get some insight into the kinds of causes that Betty believes in. One thing that I had no idea about is she is a true animal advocate. If you think that TV has had longevity in her life, well, apparently her love for animals is even longer. We learn about how when she was young, her parents used to take her into the Sierras in the summers, and they just used to observe wildlife. And in the documentary, we get to see her interact with animals, even now in her 90s, and it seems to be the thing that really lights her up. Another person who talks about her is her assistant. She has an executive assistant who helps her out on many different things in order to keep her work going. The assistant talks about Betty's impeccable work ethic, and also how when she's on set, she will sit with Betty and run lines so that Betty feels really comfortable with them before she has to go on. She also talks about how Betty has felt about being on television, how different television is from movies, and how clearly her career in television far outweighs her career in movies. And yet Ryan Reynolds reflects on her part in The Proposal and how it seemed to really help make that movie. She has so much skill. Her characters just really shine. In watching this documentary, I was really struck by the longevity of her career. She has in some ways had several careers within her career. Because she's on television and because she's been in some major series, each series seems to take place at a different time in her life and can speak to different generations. As a result, people from all different generations know who she is. Young children know who she is from her appearance in Hot in Cleveland. More middle-aged people know about Mary Tyler Moore. And older adults may remember her appearances on Life with Elizabeth. In some regards, she has become somewhat of an icon. She appeals to all audiences. And, in fact, two of her agents spoke about her in this documentary. And one of them went into great detail about the fact that she had been the guest lead to host Saturday Night Live in 2010. She would have been 88 years old then. That is really quite something. And Saturday Night Live brought in lots of their comedians who had graduated and moved on to have their own careers. They brought them back to be there to support Betty and work with her. So it was pretty cool to see clips of Betty working with the next generation of the pro comedians, all doing live television together on the same stage. But then live television was Betty's comfort zone. Just from her very humble beginnings, she was in that live show and got all kinds of experience, and that seemed to have laid a foundation and groundwork for her to be able to continue to do that kind of work well into her 80s. I also appreciated in this documentary that I got to see Betty as the actor and Betty as the human being. Although she showed that she's definitely capable of whipping out a comedic line here and there, a lot of the clips of her regular day-in, day-out life, she's actually a pretty serious person. She's focused, she's business-oriented, she really likes keeping busy and doing things. And it's definitely inspiring watching somebody at her age choosing to make the most of her life, as well as looking out for others by entertaining them. And I couldn't help but think how hard it could be for her right now. Being 98, she's outlived a lot of her co-stars. In fact, with regard to the show The Golden Girls, at this time she's the only survivor of all the actresses on that program. So Betty proves herself to be a really strong person. There are also some reflections by some of the people speaking in the documentary about what a pro she is at managing the entertainment industry, which is not an easy industry. Granted, in a documentary like this is about someone leaving a legacy behind and capturing their history, so it's unlikely that they're going to show any dark side of this person, but still, it appears that she's always pleasant, even-keeled, focused, just all around the kind of person that you'd want to work with, or who you'd want to be your mother or your aunt, or even your grandmother, or in this case, possibly your great-great-grandmother. All around, after watching this documentary, I just felt like she was blessed. She's such a lovely woman, and she's truly lucky. Based on her life path, it just seems this is exactly what she was meant to be doing. And in terms of all the documentaries that I am talking about on the podcast today, this is a very different one. And I would say that it's uplifting, it's hopeful, it's inspiring. The more I learned about Betty, and even though on her own terms she has kind of a quiet life, the fact that she's done what she has done just helps others see the possibilities that are open to them. And I love that those possibilities can include being funny. So I would definitely recommend this movie. It's not that often that we get to see into someone's full expanse of life. Stories from when they're a young child all the way up to being almost 100 years old. She's almost a century old. And that gives her insights into this industry, into being a comic, into just life that is highly unusual. While the content of this documentary I felt was quite fantastic, I would say the way the documentary was put together and the quality of it in and of itself, it was okay. I didn't feel it hit it out of the park, but it served what it needed to serve, and I felt that the more we got to know Betty and her story built throughout the documentary, the more energy and inspiration I could feel. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent movie, or in this case documentary, I'd give this one a 9. It's definitely one where you can sit back and relax and enjoy the ride. Granted, she has some kind of raunchy jokes that she's caught telling in this documentary, so keep that in mind. Again, this was rated TV 14, and I think that's just about right. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the documentaries My Octopus Teacher, which I rated an 8, The Social Dilemma, which I rated a 9, Heel, which I also rated a 9, and Betty White, First Lady of Television, which, again, I rated a 9. Here's to these films offering you some inspiration. This is your host, Elizabeth Aaron, signing out. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review that really helps us. And if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.